the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. And as you know, every week I get to talk with interesting CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies and organizations, ranging from interviewed the co-founder of Netflix a few weeks ago, YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software. You've heard me say it before. So many great people. Go check out the archives because there's some great content in there. I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. Quick shout out to John Ostenson for recommending our guest here today. His name is Michael Arrieta. He currently serves as the founder and CEO of Garden City, which is a purpose-driven buyout holding company. What is that? You're going to find out in a second. They've raised over $40 million in permanent capital to buy, grow, and forever hold service companies across the Southeast U.S. They actually seek to grow companies through culture, technology, and sales. Previously, he was an early employee at DocuSign, where he served as global VP, general manager, and chief of staff to the CEO. DocuSign now has a $40 billion market cap and 5,000 employees, so we'll hear all about that. And in 2016, he also founded MAV Ventures, venture capital group, which has invested over 20 companies, ranging from technology to healthcare to consumer goods. And we're going to dive into this in a moment. Before we get into that, of course, this is brought to you by Rise25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you are listening to this and you've ever thought, should I start a podcast? I've been saying for 11 years, absolutely you should. It's one of the best things I've ever done. And if you have any questions, you can send us an email at support@rise25media.com. All right, Michael, such a pleasure to have you here today. I've been looking forward to this interview for quite some time. You have such a storied, interesting background, and I want to ask you about all of it. So first of all, let's start with Cutco, because I've interviewed a couple of other guests, John Rulin and Hal Elrod, who cut their teeth, I hate to use that phrase, at Cutco, and worked their way up there. What was that experience like for you, starting at Cutco at 17 years old in high school, and then you became the number one sales rep in the company out of 50,000 sales reps, which is insane?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, John. Cutco was awesome. I give so much credit to Cutco. I mean, it really allowed me to, exactly as you said, cut my teeth. I look forward to the day that I could hopefully encourage my sons and daughters to sell Cutco. It allowed me to face a rejection head on, right? Many times in life, we do everything that we can to steer away from objection, right? Even though we know that our kids will face it in the future. So I think what I loved most about the opportunity is at a young age, I started selling Cutco at 17. I got to learn how to make cold calls and be hung up on. I got to learn how to sit across from people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, try to sell them a couple $1,000s, and they would laugh at your face and say, there's no way. I would learn how to drop down. So start at 10,000 and walk away with a $1,000 order. I would have to have the courage to ask for recommendations and referrals, knowing that's the lifeline and the blood of continuing to have a business. Otherwise, the well runs dry, right? Knowing time management, knowing how to set goals. So all of it taught me a ton that still applies to today.
That's great. And that led somehow to a technology company. So you go from sales to, how did you end up getting to Wise Technology after selling at a knife company?
Sold knives from junior year of high school until I graduated college. The biggest thing on my mind was, I was making six figures since I was 17 years old and making great money in college, the same sort of thing. So I graduated debt-free, was helping my family and so forth. But I always knew that if I ever wanted to sit across the table, AKA be the person to thousands of dollars for my cutlery set my kitchen, I would have to take one step back or two steps back in terms of income to take 5 or 10 forward in the future. So I basically told myself I need to stop making, X dollars and make less money with the goal and the hope and the potential that in the future I could make a lot more. And so I knew there was two ways you could make the most amount of money when I graduated school. One was sell private planes, right? So the commission on selling a Gulfstream or something like that. And the other thing was software, right? Was getting into software sales. And so I reached out to my now father-in-law, who was in software. And I just asked him, are there any CEOs I should meet? And so he said, you should meet the CEO of this company called Wise Technology. He just bought the company through a leverage buyout. And so I had a meeting with the CEO, and he was like, how old are you? I said, I don't know, 21. He goes, well, Alexander the Great conquered the world when he was 19. So you have a lot of catching up to do. And so he gave me a chance, and I joined the software world. And that was how I got in.
Wow. And you have this great story of how Wise Technology ended up getting acquired by Dell and meeting Michael Dell. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the CEO of Wise went to World Economic Forum, and we got a chance to meet Michael Dell there. Wise sold this hardware device called Thin Clients, and we also had some other software. The thing about Thin Clients was, although it was hardware that you could physically touch, it was all empowered by software. Basically, it was riding the coattails of this whole virtualization world, to be very geeky, this whole cloud world, right, of VMware and Citrix and all these things. And so we just had a meeting with Michael Dell saying, hey, you want to migrate and stop being a PC company, a hardware company, Wise could be the perfect mix. It looks like a hardware acquisition, but really it gives you your foot into this whole virtualization cloud world. And so after only a handful of conversations, it made perfect sense. And Dell acquired Wise for over $1 billion. And so out of nowhere, I blinked, and now we have a seat at the table. So now we're in the boardroom with Michael Dell every week, right? And I rised up to somehow find my way to be the chief of staff of that group, of the Dell Cloud Group. And it was phenomenal. Got a lot of experience, got to travel the world, got to see what M&A was truly like at a $40+ billion revenue company, all that good stuff.
What was it? What did you learn from Michael Dell himself personally?
A lot, even through DocuSign, because he was one of the first calls that we made once I left Dell and went to DocuSign, which he ended up putting millions of dollars into DocuSign when I went there, which is probably the coolest story of it all. But what I got
to ask about that, but continue, and then we'll get to that.
Yeah, probably what I learned most from such a icon like Michael Dell, there's a lot. One is humility. No one's ever talked about Michael and said he's pompous or arrogant or rude like that at all. Is extremely, extremely humble, from everything that he does. MSD Capital, that a lot of people now know, stands for Michael and Susan Dell, right? So he always includes his family into everything, his wife into everything. When they acquired Wise, he invited us over to his house on Lake Travis, right, to the celebration. When we would have key Wise partners come into town, he would clear his calendar and host them, right, on an acquisition that he made. He would never be the smartest person in the room. That's a very famous quote that Michael said about never be the smartest person in the room. But he actually believed that he was not the smartest person in the room, right? He actually believed that and really asked good questions and listened well, right? He never made definitive conclusions or answers in the meeting. So we were having a meeting about, should we expand into Asia Pacific for whatever new product line? We would have a whole meeting about it. And many CEOs would say, okay, so we've decided we're going to do this today, make the decision and go. He would not make the decision, and he would continue to collect data and come back to the decision later. He never forgot anything. I mean, anything. I don't know if he wrote everything down or a crazy mind, a beautiful mind, but he never forgot a single small detail on anything. A perfect example is after I left Dell, and told him I was going to DocuSign and asked him if he wanted to invest. He invested tens of millions of dollars. And I saw him about a year after that at a conference, and he asked me how myself and my newly bride, my wife, was doing. I had no clue that I even remembered telling him that I got married, So just amazing things like that to set him really apart.
That's truly phenomenal that you leave a company and you leave with a check for him to invest in that new company. And that, there's so many other companies where people are embittered, or they're angry at that person for leaving or won't let them leave. But that was the reality that he ends up investing in your new company.
Yeah, it was amazing. He split the investment half and half through Dell Ventures so that we could have a partnership through Dell, and then half personally. It was amazing. It's something that both the CEO of DocuSign and I were very grateful for.
Mm-hmm. It probably paid off pretty nicely for him.
I think very much so.
What did you see in DocuSign, this little, 2014s when you joined? Where were they at in terms of revenue or employee count at that point?
Employee count, we were right below 200. So we were pretty small company. We were on one floor in this building. And what I saw in it were a couple things. One is I tasted what it was like being at a small company of Wise, having a little bit of equity and having a transaction, right? And I tasted equity. I mean, it's not like I try to get equity at Wise. It just comes with any role when you join a small business in Silicon Valley. It's part of compensation, right? Yeah. And so once we got acquired from Dell, I was like, wait a minute, you're only going to give me a salary? Like, where's the upside, And so then it was just this aha thing for me that I would tell anyone of like, where real wealth is made and real opportunities created is through equity. And so after being at Dell for 2 years, helping integrate the two companies and doing M&A and being part of Michael Dell's private transformation team, I got to learn a ton. But at the end of the day, I was like, I want to do another Wise where the goal is to have liquidation. And so my mind and my heart was set there. I was also traveling to Round Rock, Texas every single week, and I was living in San Francisco. And so there was a lot of that going on. A lot of my friends are joining Uber, DoorDash, all these companies. And I'm like, I'm working at Dell, right? And so
it was just kind of been around the block a lot.
Yeah, like you don't live in Silicon Valley in the middle of San Francisco through this crazy unicorn days where everyone was dying to become a $1 billion pre-IPO company and work at Dell,
Yeah.
As much as I loved it. So there was that itch inside, but I also loved the chief of staff role where you're under someone's purview and wisdom and discernment, and you're learning. It's a Harvard Business School MBA mixed in with a Stanford School MBA, 365 days a week in the real world, right? Being paid for it. So I was obsessed with the chief of staff role too. I didn't just want to go to an individual contributor role. So the perfect opportunity came. One of our board members said that the CEO of DocuSign, he was looking for a new chief of staff. It was in San Francisco. It was a small startup. And I could learn from an amazing CEO. So that's why I joined.
And was it a big learning curve, or was it not, because you were coming from a tech company to another tech company at that point?
It was a massive learning curve. Yeah, it was a massive learning curve, given that it was truly software as a service. The Wise world was software, was hardware with some software. Dell was still primarily a hardware company. But now you're going into a purely SaaS business. You're going into a company that's living on fundraising, right? You're going into a company trying to grow 100% year over year or more, right? We can't keep up with headcount fast enough. So it was going into a tornado.
Yeah. And so, and now they have 5,000 employees. So must have been hiring like crazy. What kind of systems did you put in place in order to ensure, those systems worked for hiring that crazy?
Everyone has an answer, right? But you make it up as you go. I could give you a fancy answer, say, well, John, we have this system and this and that. But the truth is, we were all making it up as we go, And so in the beginning, we would just put something on LinkedIn and we would put it on the careers page. And not a lot of people would go to our website to look for careers. So we didn't get a lot of hits there. We would ask our network, hire recruiters. And then, we didn't have that many people to hire. So we would choose the best one we could. So it was just really messy and scrappy. But then we started hiring really world-class executives, right? So we hired a great a chief HR officer, and then we hired great VPs of operations for HR and so forth. So by hiring the right people, they brought in the right systems.
Yeah. Now talk a little, I want to get into Garden City in a moment, but before we do, talk a little bit about kind of reflecting on what you learned from DocuSign, because what's really interesting to me about DocuSign is that it was monetizing something that wasn't previously monetized, or people didn't expect to pay for. All of a sudden, you're paying for this software in order to transact contracts digitally. In many ways, that was very innovative at the time. For many companies, it's innovative today in 2021. It shouldn't be. But so talk a little bit about that, and then also how that reflects the work that you do now, working with service companies, many of which need to evolve and change and embrace new technologies.
Yeah. So you nailed it, right? When I went into DocuSign, I was like, this isn't that innovative. I mean, we're helping companies send out electronic signatures,
Yeah.
And we were like, we're primarily known for realtors. Like anytime I wear some DocuSign swag, someone would always say at the airport, I just bought my house and I use DocuSign. That was it. Nothing else, And so it was, but what was really impactful was when we started selling to corporations and enterprises of any size, we would see the massive benefits they would drive an organization. I mean, there would be massive ROI, so they would save hard dollar savings. There'd be better customer experience. Customers would love it better than the terrible long manual process that it was before, and better security, right? And so it really started to take headway there. What happened to me was, I come from a family of hardworking people. My sisters and I were the first people to ever graduate from college. I've always been obsessed with boring, non-sexy, basic service companies, car washes, dry cleaners, landscape companies, HVAC, plumbing, anything like that, right? I've just loved those businesses. They're easy to understand. I understand the people that work in them, and very simple things could dramatically improve the business. They're either growth or bottom dollar net income, right? And so I've always had that passion within me, and I would see how DocuSign would start to impact these businesses. So what I do today has always been on my heart of wanting to impact and buy, invest in small businesses and transform them and modernize them. I didn't really see how the two would be connected while I was at DocuSign, but now I'm seeing that basically any software is like DocuSign. It can help these small businesses.
Yeah. And it's interesting for me, since I practiced law for many years, and I've seen that industry, the legal industry, be affected by technology, continue to be affected by technology. But talk about Garden City. What inspired you to do that? And first, before we get too deep into Garden City, it was March of 2020, which kind of is seared on all of our brains. I imagine you made the decision a little bit earlier that you're going to move in this new direction. But what is it like starting a new entity in March of 2020? What was that transition like?
Yeah, so I knew in February of 2020, I read a book called Garden City. And it was written by this pastor named John Mark Comer. And it was just this really amazing book about how we're all created in God's image, and and every man, woman, and child should have an opportunity to thrive and prosper and flourish and just have a life where they have opportunity, right? And when I read, like, man, if you really want to drive change, the best place to drive change is where people spend the majority of their life, which is at work, right? And so what if we create a Berkshire Hathaway company, modeling after Berkshire Hathaway's model, where we buy businesses that employ lots of people. And then once we have these businesses, we now have an environment that we can impact people's lives. We could give them better wages. We could give them better trainings. We give them better future opportunity, right? We can invite them on this journey of helping create a built to last organization, right? And so that idea came to me in February of 2018. It's been 2 years with the idea of realizing that what I'm really doing, launching a private firm. But then when I started realizing about what private equity was, I didn't like anything in it. I didn't like that private equity firms buy companies with almost all debt and no equity. I didn't like that they buy companies with the goal of just buying it and flipping it in 3 to 5 years, right? I didn't like that they come in and they replace almost the entire management team, right? All to save dollars. I don't like any of that, right? So I said, well, what would it look like to have a really purpose-driven holding company like Berkshire Hathaway, right? And so I said, well, what if we buy these family-owned service companies and we buy them with all cash, very little debt, and we come alongside the existing management team and we say, how can we help you, right? Can we help you with generating a better culture? Can we help you with enabling some new technology like DocuSign or SalesLoft or Salesforce or whatever? Can we help you with demand gen? Can we help you with digital marketing? Can we help you with business development introductions through our community of investors, right? How can we serve you so we can grow this business? And we have no intention of selling. So we don't want to flip this in 2 years, 5 years. We want to have this forever, right? So we want to build amazing businesses. So that was the vision. It took me 2 years though to think through it, really create this unique structure, invite investors into this vision. And then I left DocuSign in February 2020, having no clue that COVID was going to hit less than 3 weeks later.
Yeah. And what was your reaction when it did? And you're launching this new entity. I imagine freaked out maybe for a short period of time.
Fortunately, I left DocuSign February 14th on Valentine's Day of 2020. And we had $20 million committed by the end of February. And so when COVID really hit the beginning of March, we already had committed capital. So it was a huge, huge, huge blessing. And there's pros and cons for COVID in my world, right? The cons is that really good businesses that just took a massive beating on earnings last year, they're like, I'm not going to sell right now because you're going to value my business at what I did last year, which is not a proper representation of my earnings, right? But then on the flip side, there's other business owners that they're like, hey, I do not want to deal with the stress of having to have my company recover and inject more capital into it, right? I'm out, right? I want out. I don't want to deal with COVID again. I don't want to deal with another downturn, right? I have too much stress. I'm 75 years old, right? I don't want to roll up my sleeves and help recover the business. So there's great businesses that suffered or suffering that the owner just wants out, which works for us as well.
How do you determine what is a perfect acquisition target for you? You mentioned some of the criteria there, but how do you know that the management team is right? It's the right size, that they're open to new technologies, but they're not going to be threatened by you coming in. And, I imagine that has been maybe taking a little while for you to figure those things out.
Yeah. So basically we have looked at over 450 businesses now since launching, and we've invested in 2, right? So pretty low ratio there of businesses that actually go through, most because the businesses that we look for are all sub 10 million of EBITDA. And almost every business in that niche, in that market, are all what I call owner hustles. The owner gets hit by a bus more, the business is gone, right? So we're not trying to buy a business that only exists because the owner gets in there and makes it work. We're trying to buy businesses that actually have a competitive advantage, have some sort of secret sauce that makes it tick, have some sort of secret sauce that makes them have a premium over their competition. So sometimes that's that they have a rock solid, really, really, really professional management team. Sometimes it's that they are the trusted brand in town. People will pay a premium for that. Sometimes it's that they have a proprietary sort of method, product, or service that no one else has. Sometimes it's an actual geographical moat that no one else can get into that territory for whatever reasons, right? So we look to say, okay, out of the 450 businesses that we looked at, what are the ones that are actually special, that are actually unique, that are not an owner hustle, right? That have double-digit margins, right? Many businesses these days are operating in sub 10-digit or sub 10% net margins, right? We look for businesses that have been around for more than 7 years, right? So have a good trajectory of profitability. It's kind of all those things. It's kind of the perfect storm. There's not one specific thing. It's just kind of, it needs to check a lot of boxes.
Yeah. And you mentioned Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire has got a lot of companies that kind of operate in silos or are very different from one another. You got Mrs. C's and you got insurance and you got railroads. Do you view them as all different companies that just are connected by their, common owner? Or do you see these companies having synergy between one another?
Well, they definitely don't have synergy between them. I mean, C's no synergies with Geico, right? But it's more so, I think, on the Berkshire model, it's more so how Buffett now runs his portfolio companies, that is very hands-off. He leans on the management team. He says, it's like we never even did a transaction. Just as it was the day before the transaction, the day that it'll be after the transaction. He's betting on a rock solid management team that has a great product, right? Ours is a little bit different, obviously, because most of the times the businesses that we are buying, the owner is looking for a succession or liquidity plan, right? So for us, there's this whole thing out there, John, called the silver tsunami. The silver tsunami means that right now in our nation's history, we've never had more businesses going through basically needing to be sold than now. Baby boomers were the most entrepreneurial generation in our country's history, right? So what happens is that you have, John Smith over here, that he's 69 years old. He runs the biggest HVAC company in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he doesn't know what to do with it. His son's a doctor. His daughter is a nurse, right? Nobody wants to take over dad's HVAC business.
Yeah.
He has no one to pass it to. And then he doesn't want to just go sell it to private equity. Maybe it's too small for private equity for the large guys because, they need to deploy their capital and they can't deploy it on writing a $5 to $10 million check, right? So maybe it's too small. So who does he sell it to? What's the succession plan, right? Those are the people that we look for. So when we partner with that John Smith at this example, many times we're partnering with John to figure out, John, who is it that would be best to take on the CEO role? Is it someone within the business that we promote from within? Is it someone from the outside that together we look for that perfect person that's going to invest in this business, right? And knowing that he's working himself out of a job eventually. Maybe he could stay on as CEO for another year or two. Maybe he moves to a chairman role of some sort, right?
Yeah.
But the whole goal is that he's eventually moving out.
Yeah, such an interesting model. All right, we're nearly out of time, Michael, but I do want to ask a question that I enjoy asking, which is, I'm a big fan of gratitude. So as you look around at your peers or your contemporaries, and you've held a lot of hats and worn a lot of hats in your career, so you can define that however you like. Who do you respect? Who do you admire these days?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of people that I respect, a lot of people that I admire. Most applicable and relevant to me are really two people, but one is Brent Beshore. He runs a firm very similar to Garden. It's a $300-400 million permanent equity firm. So he's buying small businesses just like us, right? A little bit bigger than the market we're looking at. He looks to come alongside the management team, not really change a whole lot of things, if anything at all, and just hold the business forever. And so he now has about 10 businesses. I just really admire him because he started just buying one business, then two, then three, and then he raised a $50 million fund just like we did. And then now he has the $300 million fund. His values are embodied every single day, right? He's extremely generous with his time. I was kind of idolizing him the 2 years that I was looking at leaving DocuSign to launch this. And then when I reached out to him, telling him about this idea, he just put his arms right around me. And he just has been holding my hand for the past year, helping me launch Garden City. I speak to him weekly, professionally and personally. So I really admire what he's done both professionally and personally. And then the second one is my lead investor, George Huber. He's just a self-made, amazing entrepreneur that's partners with Governor Jeb Bush in a private equity fund. And I just really, really, really respect how he's come alongside, again, me to launch Garden City from day one. Ever since I told him about the idea, he just continued to blow wind in my sail, continued to support me, said, no matter what, I'll be your lead investor, always giving me new ideas and so forth. So both of those guys, I respect and admire.
Very cool. All right, Michael, thank you so much for doing this. Where can people go to check you out? JoinGardenCity.com. Is that the best website for you, and anywhere else that they should go to learn more about you?
Yeah, I post a lot on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, just check me out, Michael Arrieta, or our website, JoinGardenCity.com.
Excellent, Michael. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.